Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Bashar al-Assad has fled to Moscow after rebels advanced on Damascus, marking the end of his 13-year rule in Syria. What does it mean for Syria? What does it mean for the Middle East? Joumanna Bercetche joins us. She's the anchor for Bloomberg Television. Joumanna, can you put into context for our listeners, our viewers here, what is happening in Syria?
Yeah, it's truly unbelievable scenes. You mentioned 13 years. Obviously, that is 13 years since the beginning of the civil war. But the Assad dynasty, and here I'm talking about the father, Hafiz al-Assad, his son, Bashar al-Assad, who took over early 2000s. They've been around since 1970. So wow. If you think about it, most people alive today do not know a Middle East that did not have the Assad regime at the helm of Syria. And of course, they ruled with a very a heavy thumb. It was essentially a totalitarian dictatorship. They were the only political party that was allowed. Political dissent was not allowed. And now you're seeing these images of jubilation from Syrians inside and outside Syria, really celebrating the end of what is known as, and what was, a very brutal regime that imprisoned many prisoners for political reasons, and really pursued a government of oppression and repression. So on one side, there are lots of scenes of jubilation. Now, on the other side, of course, this is the Middle East. And the big question here is what happened next in terms of who takes over, but also in terms of all of the countries that had a vested interest for whatever reason. And here I'm talking about the likes of Iran, about Russia, about Turkey, about Israel, about all of the countries neighboring Syria that have a vested interest in what happens next with this country.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. And you bring up the dynamic involving Turkey. I think about who the U.S. has backed in this conflict as well. Yeah. And I wonder how you see this playing out. A lot of people are bringing up what happened in Iraq, for instance, or Libya after the deposition of those leaders there. How much is that a good analogy as you see it? And sort of how might this play out going forward? This is a country with a lot of disparate groups, and I think hopes for democracy might be waning here as we watch all of this come together.
So you're going to hear a lot about a guy called Mohammed al-Jolani, that is the leader of the rebel group, the main rebel group, HTS, Hayat Tahrir Sham, who were leading the offense into Damascus the last couple of days. And one thing to note about him is he sort of rebranded himself. He's actually changed back to his normal name, Ahmed al-Shara. That's the name that he wants to be known by. But also is trying to rebrand the group, the militia group itself. It obviously has its foundations with Al-Qaeda. What he's been trying to do over the last couple of months is distance himself and the group from any Al-Qaeda affiliations. Is, by the way, very important to mention, they're still labeled a terrorist organization by the US and other countries as well. This is HDS, the main group that just toppled Assad. And so, yes, there is a lot of consternation about what this group is actually going to do. But then the second element to note is it was actually quite peaceful. So they stormed into all of these cities, but not a lot of damage was wreaked. There wasn't a lot of bloodshed. There wasn't a lot of exchange or battles or exchange of fire on the battleground. And actually, in the end, Assad just fled to Russia, per Russian state media. And so the handover so far has been somewhat of a peaceful transition, but it's what they do with that power and whether or not this one group, HDS, is going to manage to get the support of all of these other rebel forces that happen to be present in the country. You mentioned ISIS as well. Very small representation there, but still, if these small extremist groups see a window of opportunity or a vacuum, I think that will be the major concern for the likes of the U.S., obviously, who've been pursuing an anti-ISIS policy in the region, for over a decade now.
So, Joumanna, what do folks in that part of the world think the U.S. response will be, should be, under President Biden, under President-elect Trump? Is there an expectation of that the U.S. will play some role going forward?
We were speaking to some analysts on the show earlier today, and they all had the same view, which is that the U.S. or President Trump himself, given his post over the weekend, may not want to be involved in Syria, but unfortunately for him, he will have to be involved in Syria simply because of its strategic importance and because of all the players that we listed are involved in Syria. As for the U.S. troops, there are about 900 troops positioned in the northeastern part of Syria. That is the Turkish enclave. And they're stationed there because, again, that is where they have been fighting some of these ISIS forces. So that group, the Free Syrian Army, as they know, the Kurdish group, are closely aligned to the U.S. Enter President Erdogan from Turkey. His concern is the number of refugees that have been flooding into Turkey since the beginning of the Syrian civil war. It's more than 3.5 million. It's a political point. He's closely watching what is happening with the Kurdish enclave on the border. Does not want to see that region become an autonomous breakaway region like what happens in Iraq. And so the reason I bring this all up is there are going to be a lot of discussions, negotiations going on vis-a-vis the future of Syria, not just in terms of Damascus and governance, but also these other regions as well, which for Turkey are very important.
I want to ask you lastly just about a column that John Authors, our colleague, wrote this morning. I thought it was fascinating, and I think a question a lot of listeners will be asking is, how does this affect me? Why is this so important? I look at Syria. It's not an oil-producing nation, for instance. And he writes it could be a great litmus on the state of Russia today and the power that Russia has and President Putin has in particular. And so you talked about kind of the 13-year civil war. This lasted a long time until it didn't. Things really accelerated here over these last 2 weeks. But it might point to some weakness on the part of Russia, of Iran as well. And I wonder if you could just talk a bit about that, kind of the broader geopolitical implications of this and sort of what it might tell us about these proxy governments who've been involved in this fight for so long.
Yeah. So one thing I want to bring up is the rebels actually started their offense the day Lebanon and Israel signed the ceasefire. I don't know if that was a coincidence, but still, they sensed the window of opportunity there. And I think the analysis in the region suggests that what is trying to be done here is to effectively block off the corridor that was Syria, that allowed for the transport of weapons from Iran into Iran's ally, the militia Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Syria was seen as a key corridor. So number one is they want to limit the amount of arms and weapons and fighters that have been transported through Syria over the last few years, even drugs, by the way. There's a big narco trade that people don't really talk about. The second thing is chemical weapons. Today, there were some reports suggesting that the IDF had targeted a chemical weapons facility within Syria. So you want to keep an eye on that and dismantling Syria's full chemical weapon warehouses. And then the third point, what you were saying about Russia, they do still have a couple of bases, an air base and a naval base on the Syrian port, but it's less relevant for them. And likely what people are saying is they're going to use the Syria negotiating point as a tactic to get more concessions on the Ukraine discussions. And of course, they've been embroiled in the war there for several years now.
All right, Joumanna, thank you so much for joining us. Joumanna Bercetche, great reporting there. She's anchor for Bloomberg Television. She's based in Abu Dhabi, giving us the latest coming out of Syria.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
That's where you're going to start with this.
That's where I'm starting.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody loves bashing Chapel Hill more than me, but
it's true.
They have a lot of smart people coming out of that place.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are employed here in journalism. I don't know what that's all about. I think they have a good journalism
They have a great
school.
business journalism program in particular.
All right,
yes.
You tell me. I'll go with it. Callie Cox is one of them, Chief Market Strategist at Ritholtz Wealth Management. She joins us here on our Bloomberg Interactive.
So gracious. That was
studio.
the most gracious.
I know.
It's
I
the new
so
me.
honored.
It's
the new you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm turning over a new leaf. We can both coexist. We're 15 miles apart on.
True.
15,
if that.
10 miles. 15,501 between Durham and Chapel Hill. Callie, we're thinking here. S&P 500 up 27-28% year to date. Even on a equal weight basis, up 16-17% year to date. Pretty solid returns for this equity market. How do you guys kind of reset and think about 2025?
Well, I like what you said about equal weight, Paul, because I think that's where the focus should be going into 2025. Yes, the S&P has had an incredible year. It's actually the second straight year of 20% gains. And we're telling investors not to get too greedy. I mean, you don't see 20% gains happen year after year very often. So, I think the point here is to look underneath the surface, look for value underneath the surface. And what you said about the equal weight index shows that we are getting some return on those more value-oriented stocks, those unloved areas of the bull market that are finally getting their day in the sun.
Give us a few of them, such as what's unloved? Where's the value? What's unloved as you see it?
Well, such as, I think the easiest place to start is stuff outside of tech.
Yeah.
There's been a tech versus everything else trade
Yes.
going on. So when people talk about valuations in the S&P, typically they're talking about big tech valuations. And you have to sort out by sector and sector to really find the value. We really like rate sensitive sectors here. I think real estate is interesting. I think consumer discretionary could be interesting, especially if the economy holds up through 2025. Financials, of course, have been really strong in the back half of the year. That could also be interesting, especially if the economy surprises to the upside. But what we're communicating to investors is you don't get too greedy here, but at the same time, don't get too downtrodden on this market. There's a gray area that you can exist in going into next year.
So, talking to Barry Ritholtz a lot, I mean, I know you guys think really long term for your clients here. How do you think about, well, let's step back. We're a month removed from the election here. We've got a new political outlook here for this country over the next 4 years, both in the legislative branch as well as the executive branch. Did that change the way you guys at Ritholtz think about opportunities, risks going forward?
Well, of course, we discussed it, right?
Yep.
I feel like if you're a risk manager and you haven't discussed the election and the potential changes in policy, then you're not doing your job. But we are catering to long-term clients that are looking 10, 20 years down the road. And at this point, it really is a bunch of short-term speculation. And, I take comfort in the fact that I'm not a policy analyst. Mm-hmm. I'm not the one that has to step out there and say tariffs could happen, tax cuts could happen, insert policy here could happen. But what we tell investors is to kind of take the policy news as it comes. We're not even at inauguration day yet. We're not sure what policy will actually be passed. And what we saw in 2016 was there was a lot of back and forth around policy. And, it took years for everything to settle out. So we're taking it as it comes. We're telling investors to stay vigilant, but to not, dive too far into headlines there.
We've got Veronica Clark, another UNC alumna, in the green room, another Tar Heel coming up here. We'll talk about sort of the fundamentals of the labor market as she sees it. But could you talk about the way in which, for instance, the jobs data that we just got inform your thinking about positioning, sort of the health of the economy, dovetailing that with your outlook? So less about sort of the politics and potential policy, but what we're seeing in the real economy today.
Yeah, well, the job market is almost everything, David. Americans in this capitalist machine that we live in, if Americans are making money and they're spending money, the economy most of the time is doing well. And that's what was proven to us over and over again in 2022 and 2023. So the job market is at a moderate, expanding at a moderate pace right now. Unemployment is rising, which is concerning. Luckily, it's not rising on the layoff side. When people think about unemployment, they think about mass layoffs. Mm-hmm. That's not happening. It's more so people entering the labor force and not necessarily finding a job so quickly, which isn't good, but it's not the worst news. So as we head into 2025, the job market has surprised us all. Corporate profits are growing, so hopefully that leads to more hiring. But this is the biggest concern for me. You see recessions and big market crises happen almost, in tandem with each other. So, as we head into 2025, we're talking about the job market a lot. We're saying, watch jobless claims, keep your finger on the pulse of the pace of hiring and use that to guide you when it comes to the economy and to what the Fed does.
How about valuation? How do you guys think about valuation these days in this marketplace? Because again, just on the SPX up 26, 27%, I'm not sure earnings have grown that fast.
They haven't, but people expect them to grow that fast in 25. And I'm not sure how to feel about that. But when we talk about value in our minds at Ritholtz is the great equalizer. Markets over the long term balance out toward value. So we try to emphasize, focusing on value, especially in markets like these where there are pockets of value, but then also pockets of, expensive stocks that people are talking about, right? Pockets of expensiveness, if that's a word. So, value is a big, priority for us when we're thinking about investments at Ritholtz, and we still think there's a lot of value in this market.
Can I ask you lastly just about buybacks? I'm very uninformed on all of it, but I see that we're heading for another record here, and obviously this is a time of year when there are a lot more of them. How is that affecting the market? What does that say to you about the health of the markets, the quantity of buybacks that we're seeing from companies?
Well, I'm going to put my analyst hat on
Please.
and say if you own a stock and your stock is doing a buyback, then that's probably the best outcome for you from a tax perspective. Take a step back. A lot of companies are doing buybacks. That's probably a good sign for the year ahead, although it could show that markets are a little bit frothy. I don't think too much about it. I think we're in this era where companies are paying attention to their capital and to what they can do for shareholders. Not necessarily as much to workers, although that's gotten a little bit better in the past few years. And I'd like to see that come into balance a little bit more because I think that could solve a lot of problems in the economy. But the level of buybacks right now isn't too much of a concern for me.
No Belichick commentary. You don't want to get in on that?
Well, I came prepared.
So what is the thinking amongst the Chapel Hill folks? Is he going there?
I think it's like it's his if he wants it. Is what I've read.
It sounds like it's almost a done deal, and that's kind of crazy. We could have cut off sweatshirts on the sideline.
Yes.
I thought he would have gotten an NFL job, but
well, I think he was looking at Jacksonville. Jacksonville was looking at him as well, but who could resist Chapel Hill?
Chapel Hill.
I don't know.
It's a beautiful place.
It's the best job in college football right now. It really is. It really is. It's a great institution. It's a program that can grow. We have a good amount of money.
It's a basketball school, though, so I'm told.
It's true.
They said that about Duke for many decades,
exactly.
And now look at you. So.
We're going to another bowl. I think they're going to the Tax Slayer Bowl.
Yes.
Duke is. So watch out. Callie Cox, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Callie Cox, Chief Market Strategist for Ritholtz Wealth Management.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
President-elect Donald Trump said he would use his powers on his, quote, first day in the White House to grant pardons to rioters involved in the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Quote, I'm going to be acting very quickly, Trump said in an interview with NBC's Meet the Press on Friday. Henrietta Treyz joins us, and she's at Veda Partners. She helps us kind of understand what's happening down there in the world of Washington, D.C. on the political front here. Henrietta, thanks for joining us here. How serious do you think President-elect Trump is, and what would that mean for him politically?
I think he's very serious about that, and I think it's going to be, hopefully on a case-by-case basis. Some of these folks have been in prison for 20 plus years for hurting and assaulting police officers. So those are more serious crimes. But I think right out of the gate, he's looking to deliver on some of the red meat that he promised his voters on the campaign trail. We all know that the tax bill is going to take a full year to complete. So some of the other things on immigration, deportation, freeing some January 6ers, things along those lines are what I would expect in the first 100 days of the next administration.
This was a wide-ranging interview that Kristen Welker conducted, and something she did ask about is what plans he has, if any, for Fed Chair Jerome Powell. What did you hear in that answer, and how much do you think that was something that was of concern to investors, to markets broadly, just this uncertainty about whether or not the president-elect had plans to remove or ask for the removal of Fed Chair Jay Powell?
Yeah, for the street, this was really a huge issue. Maybe 6 months ago, there was a lot of questions that I would always get, is Jay Powell safe? His term runs until 2026. I think that what President-elect Trump has correctly assessed is that it's not worth the political capital to go after Jay Powell, create an undue disruption from somebody who's otherwise very aggressively soothed markets and is speaking as something of a calming force. I think that investors like the separation that they're seeing more than anything else. And I think that Jay Powell has gone a long way towards saying, I will not be leaving. And President-elect Trump has to adapt to that. So the markets and sort of keeping markets calm requires that Jay Powell not be confronted in any kind of way. And President-elect Trump acknowledged that reality.
What do you believe is the to-do list on day one of the Trump administration? How do you think they're going to proceed really over that first 100 days or whatever the relevant time period is?
Yeah, I think that there are, again, some sort of red meat hanging things like pardoning some of the January 6th insurrectionists makes a lot of sense. The Senate Republican Conference is making it clear that the tax bill is going to take all year. So they're diverting to three other issues: military preparedness, energy, and immigration. So I'm expecting a crackdown on immigration and deportations. Folks with temporary protected status, I think, should be on pretty high alert as we try to identify who can be identified as a immigrant that maybe should not be here permanently. and going after folks that we can at least find. So I think that is where a lot of the focus is going to be. Should we see any action on tariffs, I'm concerned that it's going to be via the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, which is something that the president can do with an executive order at the stroke of a pen. It does not involve something as advanced as withdrawing from the phase 1 agreement with China, though that is also something that they could telegraph on day 1. But under IEEPA, you get a focus on immigration with Canada and Mexico, and then fentanyl with those countries as well as China. And so there you could see some movement on tariffs immediately. As you know, the Customs and Border Patrol guys can change tariff rates within 12 hours. So that could really be an immediately effective development.
I want to get your read on what this economic team looks like, how happy Wall Street should be with its composition. So a couple of weeks back, we had Scott Bessent put forward as the president's pick to be the next Treasury Secretary. There was this great sigh of relief. I heard it that he's somebody that Wall Street knows and is seen sort of as a moderating figure, somebody who might push against the president-elect's worst instincts when it comes to trade policy, for instance. And then we get this appointment of Peter Navarro, noted rabble-rouser, noted China hawk. And I wonder what that tells you about what meetings are going to be like of that economic team, yes, in the cabinet room, but beyond that, sort of how loud his voice is going to be and sort of what that potential boisterous disagreement is going to mean for the direction of economic policy in this second Trump term.
I have no expectations that Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary is going to be a mitigating force against the tariff-minded members of the rest of the cabinet, whether that's Howard Lutnick at Commerce, whether that's Peter Navarro in a trade sort of overarching position, Kevin Hassett, who is a very well-known person on Capitol Hill and is going to be in the ear of members. You see that in Jamison Greer, who was Chief of Staff to Ambassador Lighthizer. There are folks with deep experience in DC, and Scott Bessent is not that guy. So while Wall Street might have some comfort knowing that he has invested funds before and speaks Wall Street's language, he's not the one that is going to be the muscle in the room, either at the cabinet level or on Capitol Hill. So I'm expecting the folks who are very supportive of tariffs, including most importantly, President-elect Trump, to have a much louder voice. And you see that in legislation that's already been introduced by Chairman Molinar about the stripping China of its PNTR status. The trade focus, the tariff focus is very aggressive and well built out. The Scott Bessent camp that maybe supports a more gradual increase in tariffs of 5% every month, which is what I last heard from him, is something that I think is going to see a much diminished role as we get into the next administration.
Mass deportations, is there any feeling in Washington, D.C., how that would actually work?
Yeah, I'm having preliminary conversations with staff right now, and I think one of the big concerns is about the impact that this is going to have on primary season, on general election season, on the legislative to-do list for Congress. So as we get into next year in the first quarter, it's likely that we're going to have a conversation about a government shutdown if they fund the government through March, about the debt ceiling, which is going to be highly contentious for Republicans to deal with. And if in the backdrop of that, we have folks, this is exactly what staff says to me, if people's grandmothers are being deported, then we have a very real problem. People point out Miami-Dade specifically as an area that's going to be a concern. A lot of Republicans now in the state of Florida, newly elected Republicans, in the gains that Trump has made there in the last 8 years. And that's really something that they're considering sort of the backdrop to the legislative agenda. And that's as they're trying to get Democratic support for keeping the government open or hiking the debt ceiling. And if there are mass deportations going on, I'm not expecting a lot of Democratic support for whatever is in the Republicans' agenda, whether it's Trump's or Majority Leader Thune's or Speaker Johnson's.
Henrietta Treyz, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate getting some of your perspective. Henrietta Treyz, she's a managing partner at Veda Partners.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.
Your daily look at the front pages around the world. Lisa Mateo newspapers. What do you have for us today, Lisa?
Okay, so this is the management top 250 ranking. Microsoft actually has been dethroned from that annual list. This year, 842 companies. They were graded 5 categories. Unseating Microsoft for the number 1 spot is, I don't know if you have any guesses, but it is Apple. Yeah, I kind of guessed that. Microsoft held actually that top spot for the past 4 years. So if you look at the top 4, then you have NVIDIA, followed by Microsoft, and then there's Intel. But 2 other tech companies actually, they scored in the top 10. You have Alphabet and Adobe also in there, but 4 non-tech companies also in the top 10, like MasterCard, Philip Morris, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble too. But yeah, Microsoft has been dethroned from that
Interesting. I
annual
wonder
list.
how they rank them, stock price performance, return, financial returns. Do people like working there? I don't know. But it's interesting. So there are a lot of technology companies.
Yeah, a lot of tech companies.
Healthcare at the bottom of that list.
Oh, no.
Looks like.
Is that
Yeah.
right?
So,
Goodness.
anyway, that's where we
I
are.
don't know. See, I'll bash healthcare companies for the high cost of drugs, just
Sure.
like anybody else. But boy, in the pandemic, they came through big. I mean, a year after they come out with the vaccines. How about that?
And it seems like this may be telling the story of that, how well they did then, and now where we are, and sort of how the things have ebbed and flowed a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. All right, what's next?
Okay, Mayor Eric Adams from New York City being criticized for his administration picks to run that downtown Manhattan heliport, the one that we have here. The Post actually has this. They explain why, because they say the administration chose 2 foreign firms to run that heliport. It's actually owned by the city. And it has a lot of national security circles worried because the president's Marine One chopper uses
I've seen
it.
this, yeah.
Yeah, and then U.S. military, federal law officials use
I didn't
it
know
as
that
well.
was city run.
It is city. It's city-owned. Yeah, city-owned heliport.
City-owned,
So
okay.
it's the Economic Development Corporation. So they chose, it's downtown Skyport. That's a partnership between Skyport's Infrastructure, a UK-based firm. And then they chose France's Group ADP that operates Paris's 3 airports. So both companies, they replace Saker Aviation, that was before it. But they're just saying that, a lot of information is given there. And then you have foreign companies kind of running it. So they're saying that could be a red flag.
My eye goes to this. The current operator faced controversy last year after it was revealed that William Wachtel, chairman of the board of Saker Aviation, is law partners with Morris Misri, a board member at the EDC. So I think that's what precipitated this.
Yes.
I don't know.
Little conflict of interest there. Just a bit, just a bit.
I don't fly a helicopter.
You haven't? No,
so I'm
only
not
on
really
rare
too-
occasions are you flying in from New Jersey on
Well,
the
the thing they're
helicopter.
saying, because a lot of people complain about the noise in the area from all
There
the
are a lot of them.
helicopters. Yeah, so the thing that they said was downtown Skyport, they actually developed the use of quieter electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, so maybe that could help out. But yeah, still some concern there, though.
Okay.
So this next story, I'm not Paul, I know you
Yes.
haven't been on a Disney
No,
cruise.
I have been on a Disney.
You have?
So this
On
is
the
what we
Disney
did
cruise?
for analyst investors. They would take you when you fly out to LA one time. The one time we did it out of Miami, and they take you out for like an overnight. And then you come back in. So it's like literally if you go
So you
out.
did an overnight.
Right, and so you
They
have
give you a
investor meetings
balcony?
in the afternoon. And then you go party crazy overnight, and then you cruise back for all the analysts and investors. So I did that twice, and their cruise ships. Having been on a few cruise ships just for analyst meetings, they are different.
Impressed?
Huge. The quality is unbelievable.
Oh, and you've taken the family, David? No?
I have not.
No,
I've never
okay.
cruised on any vessel, Disney
Yep.
or otherwise, but
Yep.
I have gone to Disney World. That's my latest.
But they're really putting their money behind it. They want to more than double their fleet from 6 to 13 ships by 2031. But it's a good time for it, right? You have cruise travel surpassing pre-pandemic levels. You have these bigger ships, big amenities, rising international fares. So people say, you know what, it's cheaper for me to take a ship at a port by us instead of booking the whole international fare. But they do cost more than, let's say, Royal Caribbean or Carnival. That's the other thing. But a big focus is actually, this was interesting, this was on the Bloomberg, is the Asian market. Because they don't have those
They
theme
haven't been there
parks.
yet.
So they book those trips. They're launching Disney Adventure. It's the biggest ship yet. It holds up to 6,700 passengers. And tickets go on sale starting tomorrow for that, a year in advance.
Wow.
And
Out
in
of
the Bloomberg
Singapore.
terminal,
Out of
they've
Singapore,
got this
yes.
rendering. The thing is just massive.
They already seem so like even just around New York. If you look in Brooklyn or on the West Side, they're so huge as it is. I can't imagine them being twice as big as.
It's great.
I mean, I
That's
was
a
actually
lot of
taking the
people.
ferry from the east side Manhattan down to the Jersey Shore a couple weeks ago, and I'm just looking at my phone. I happened to just look up, and we were passing a cruise ship that blocked out this entire sky. Like, I noticed I was looking at my phone, and then it got dark inside our little ferry. It's like, so anyway, Charlie Pellet is our resident cruise person. So if you need any
I wonder if he's been on the Disney one. We're gonna have to ask him.
Exactly.
We'll see about that. And finally, the end of the era. Taylor Swift's concert tour closes. Record-breaking ticket sales. Hit it, Ken.
I'm in the room. It's a typical Tuesday night. I'm listening to the kind of music she
Thank you, Ken. Love it. Taylor Swift. Okay, boosts in the local economy, but now her touring company is telling the New York Times there is a price behind this, okay? It's through its 149th final show, which was in Vancouver, British Columbia on Sunday. Sold just over $2 billion in ticket sales. With a B, double the gross ticket sales of any other concert tour in history. It's crazy. No, I haven't seen it. Oh, she is?
But you can get these tickets. So took a train down to Philadelphia, got a hotel room overnight, ate a couple meals in Philadelphia, and saw the show down in Philadelphia, giving probably $500 or $750 of economic value to the city of Philadelphia. So I think it's definitely a real thing at concerts.
It has a huge effect. And then, I didn't see a show, but we saw the movie. I know there's all those knock-on things as well, because there was that and the books
movie,
and all of that.
The book, the pact with Disney to stream the thing, Disney Plus. I mean, that's not even including that. So yeah, she's been a powerhouse for sure.
All right. Newspapers, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.